Have you ever found yourself defending your choices, only to feel smaller afterward? What if I told you that every time you explain yourself, you're actually lowering your status? In this episode, we're going to solve a hidden problem: why your need to be understood is costing you power, and how to stop it, Machiavelli style. When we speak of power, most imagine it as something concrete: titles, money, armies. But true power, the kind that moves nations, silences rooms, and alters the course of lives, is perception. And perception, dear listener, is not about truth. It is about control. You see, it's not what you are, it's what they believe you are. You may be intelligent, competent, and noble. You may have the purest intentions and the most rational arguments, but if you are seen as uncertain, insecure, or submissive, none of it matters. The perception of strength is often more influential than strength itself. This is why leaders can be wrong yet respected, and why the wise, if they appear unsure, are ignored. Now understand this: when you feel the urge to explain yourself, it is rarely about communication. It is about reassurance. You are not speaking to inform, you are speaking to convince. And the very act of convincing tells your audience that something is in question, that something about you needs defending. And once you are defending, you have already lost ground. Imagine a king standing before his court, having made a decision to execute a traitor. The decision is firm, final, but then he begins to explain. He says, "I did it because I had no choice. I considered the man's family. I weighed his intentions. I sought counsel." And suddenly, the court begins to wonder: was he unsure? Was he pressured? Did he act out of fear, not authority? In trying to sound reasonable, the king sounds weak, because power does not justify. Power asserts. Machiavelli knew this intimately. He observed the difference between feared rulers and loved ones, between those who ruled by perception and those who crumbled trying to be understood. He saw that people follow confidence, not because it's always right, but because it feels safe. It feels dominant. And dominance is what people crave to align themselves with. This is why explaining yourself can be a fatal misstep. It chips away at the image you've built. Every sentence you add becomes a crack in the mask. People don't need to see what's behind the mask. They need to believe in the mask. The illusion must be maintained. Let's go deeper. In a negotiation, for example, the more you talk, the more you reveal. You reveal doubts. You reveal pressure points. You expose the edges of your confidence. The more you try to explain your position, the more the other side begins to see through it. The very act of explaining transforms your authority into an open book, one they can dissect, analyze, and undermine. And this behavior is not limited to politics or boardrooms. It happens in daily life. At work, when you explain your decisions to peers who never asked. In relationships, when you justify your silence or independence. On social media, when you defend your opinions to strangers who hold no real power over you. What you're doing is broadcasting that their opinion matters more than your stance, that their comfort is worth more than your composure, that their judgment has the power to dictate your behavior. And once they believe that, they begin to act accordingly. You may think you're being kind, respectful, considerate, but what you're actually being is predictable. Predictability breeds complacency, and complacency invites challenge. People do not fear what they understand. They fear what they cannot control. They fear the person who does not feel the need to be liked, validated, or explained. Let's return for a moment to ancient courts, where monarchs and emperors ruled with divine right. Their silence was part of their mystique. Their words were rare and therefore sacred. Their decisions were final and unaccompanied by lectures or pleas. When they did speak, it was to command, not to be understood. And that distance, that mystique, created awe, even fear. That is the currency of power. Perception is the currency. You must protect it more fiercely than the truth itself. You must become a master of what others believe about you, not because it is fake, but because it is strategic. When you feel the impulse to explain, pause. Ask yourself, not what is true, but what will this explanation cost me in perception? Am I building my power? or slowly bleeding it away in words that no one asked for. Because every time you speak without being questioned, every time you volunteer reasoning for something that needs none, every time you justify what needs no justification, you do not add clarity, you subtract influence. There is something subtle, almost invisible, about the moment a person begins to explain themselves. To the untrained eye, it looks like humility, it looks like reason, it looks like someone trying to do the right thing. But those who understand power see it for what it truly is, a signal of internal uncertainty, because no one who is absolutely convinced of their own authority ever feels the need to explain it. When you explain, you are not just filling silence, you are admitting to everyone watching that you think something may be unclear or worse, indefensible, and that admission leaks out in every word. Every phrase, every clarification, every "let me just say," each one whispers the same message: I doubt myself and I want you not to. But power doesn't beg for belief. It doesn't campaign for understanding. Power plants itself like a stone and lets the world either adapt or break around it. Now pause and consider this. If you were truly certain of your action, your position, your value, why would you explain it? You wouldn't. You'd do, you'd declare, you'd decide, you wouldn't justify. You would radiate a kind of quiet finality that tells others, this is how it is, not because I said it with evidence, but because I said it, and I never asked what you thought. The paradox is this: the more you try to make others understand, the more they begin to question what they didn't even think to question. The doubt wasn't there until you delivered it to them wrapped in your own voice. Watch what happens in everyday interactions. A man arrives late. Before anyone even opens their mouth, he says, "Sorry, I'm late. Traffic was bad, and I had to drop my sister off." And then, he's not defending the action anymore. He's defending himself. He's announcing that he fears judgment, and in doing so, he confirms that judgment is now justified. Whereas a man who arrives late and says nothing, he forces the room to decide whether they're brave enough to challenge him. He leaves it ambiguous. He creates a tension that either collapses under confrontation or hardens into silent authority. And most people, not wanting conflict, will say nothing. It is not about the lateness. It is about how you teach people to treat you. Every act of explanation says, "I am still waiting for your approval." And if you train people to expect that approval, seeking, they will withhold their respect until you beg for it. The leaders of history, the feared, the revered, the untouchable, they rarely explained, not because they had nothing to say, but because they understood what speech implied. It is not the content of your words that matters. It is what your need to speak says about you. People watch for clues. Subconsciously, they're always evaluating, does this person believe what they're doing? Are they sure? Should I follow them? Should I question them? The moment you try to explain yourself, you open the door to those questions. And power, real power, is built by closing that door and bolting it shut. This isn't about being cold. It's about being impenetrable. Your actions must be enough. Your decisions must speak for themselves. When you act, let it be final. Let your silence be louder than your justifications. Because once people sense that you are susceptible to their doubt, they will exploit it, consciously or not. Even in personal relationships, this pattern plays out. Someone says, "I didn't text because I was overwhelmed and my battery died, and then I was going to, but I figured maybe you didn't want to hear from me." They aren't just giving information, they are unraveling. And as they unravel, they shrink in the other person's eyes, not because of what happened, but because of how they reacted to it. The explanation signals not just doubt, but emotional instability, and instability never commands respect. There's an old saying, the loudest man in the room is the weakest, but the man who explains himself the most, he's not just weak, he's exposed. Every time he opens his mouth to defend himself, he opens a door into his psychology, his insecurities, his pressure points. And once that door is open, it can be walked through repeatedly. Machiavelli observed this not just in courts, but in war. The general who overjustifies a retreat is viewed as afraid. The ruler who explains every tax is viewed as unsure. The man who defends his honor too often is suspected of having none. To hold power, you must understand what the need to explain truly reveals, not to the listener, but to the predator. It reveals where your fear lies. It tells others where to push, where to prod, where to unravel you next time. And those who desire power must become unfathomable, not easily mapped, not easily understood, because the moment they understand you, they own a piece of you. In a world obsessed with transparency, the man who remains unreadable is the one most feared. Mystery is not an accessory to power. It is its armor, its disguise, its weapon. The moment people understand you, they categorize you. They strip you of complexity. They reduce you to something familiar. And familiarity never breeds reverence. It breeds comfort, and comfort kills dominance. Those who crave power must learn this. When others know your motives, your goals, your reasoning, they begin to prepare for you. They begin to shape you in their minds. They try to predict you. They think they've figured you out, and once they believe they know your game, they start playing it against you. But the one who cannot be read, cannot be controlled. Mystery unsettles people. It makes them hesitate. It makes them ask, what is he really thinking? What is she planning? When your next move is unknown, your mere presence becomes a form of pressure. You create an atmosphere where every word you don't say becomes louder than the ones you do. This is why Machiavelli praised the art of concealment. He knew that what is hidden carries more weight than what is revealed. People fear the unknown. They fill in blanks with their own imagination, usually worse than the truth. That fear works in your favor. Say little, reveal less, let them guess. Because when others are forced to guess your intent, they rarely assume innocence. They assume power. The absence of clarity leads them to build myths around you. You become a projection, not a person. And in that projection, you grow larger than life. Watch how a man who answers every question directly, clearly, transparently gets treated. He is familiar, mapped, predictable. He becomes part of the furniture. Useful, perhaps, but never feared. Never admired from a distance. Now contrast that with the man who listens more than he speaks, who moves with deliberation but offers no commentary, who acts without announcing, who observes but never explains. He becomes enigmatic, and the enigmatic are always more powerful than the obvious. Mystery is presence without exposure. It's what made rulers divine. It's what makes CEO untouchable. It's what gives that one colleague in every room a strange edge, because no one knows exactly what he wants or how far he's willing to go to get it. Do you want respect? Stop narrating your every move. Do you want influence? Stop explaining your every decision. Do you want power? Stop telling people your plans before they feel the consequences of them. Let others speak. Let others show their hands. Let others spill their intent like amateurs. You stay unreadable, not out of shyness, but by design. It's a common mistake. People think sharing their intentions earns trust. They think being clear makes them honorable. It doesn't. It makes them easy to anticipate, easy to disarm, easy to replace. Mystery is what makes a statement land heavier. It's why the same line from a silent man weighs more than an entire speech from a talkative one. Because his words are rare, his thoughts are hidden, and what is rare is always more valued than what is abundant. Even in battle, this law applies. The general who disguises his troop movements wins. The enemy who cannot be read is the enemy that forces caution. Whole wars have been lost not because of numbers, but because of misread intentions. Strategy dies in the face of mystery. In court politics, it is even more ruthless. The moment your ambitions are revealed, they become targets. The moment your loyalties are known, they become liabilities. The courtier who survives is the one whose face says nothing, whose eyes give nothing, who plays all sides because no one knows which side he's on. This isn't deception, it's discipline. It's the restraint to withhold when everyone else is rushing to share. It's the patience to observe while others perform. It's the strength to act while others explain. Mystery gives you time, space, leverage. People don't attack what they don't understand. They wait, they watch, they hesitate, and in hesitation, you take the upper hand. There's a reason kings wore masks at masquerades, a reason leaders surround themselves with layers of interpretation, a reason the most powerful figures in history could never be easily defined. Because once you are fully understood, you are fully disarmed. Let them wonder what you're after. Let them invent theories about your behavior. Let them feel the tension of not knowing if your ally or adversary, in that uncertainty, is your leverage in that fog. You become untouchable. There is a power more commanding than words, more precise than explanation, more feared than argument. It is silence, not the silence of the weak, not the silence of the unsure, but the silence of the man who knows his worth and does not need to prove it. In a world addicted to noise, silence is a provocation. When you withhold your voice, when you refuse to explain, when you sit in stillness while others scramble for understanding, you flip the hierarchy. You reverse the chase, you become the question, not the answer. Power speaks yes, but supreme power waits, it listens, it absorbs, and it only responds when it must. Not because it's unsure, but because it understands the value of scarcity. Because every word unspoken grows heavier in the minds of those who expect it. Your silence becomes louder than their demands. Most people talk because they fear the consequences of being misunderstood. But those who hold real influence are willing to be misunderstood because they know something others don't, that attention is not respect, and respect is never negotiated out loud. It is commanded through presence, posture. And silence, think of a courtroom. The accused speaks frantically, pleading, justifying, but the judge, he does not explain himself. He sits, he listens, he speaks only to decide, and that, not the robe or the bench, is what makes him feared. Because when you don't rush to explain yourself, people begin to imagine what's going on behind your silence. They create their own interpretations, and often, they overestimate you. Silence creates space for imagination. And imagination, unlike facts, cannot be challenged. It lingers, it haunts. When you explain, people analyze your logic. When you stay silent, they are left with only assumptions, and assumptions are more powerful than arguments. Watch what happens in a room when someone asks you a question, and you don't answer immediately. The air changes, people shift, the asker gets nervous, time stretches. Every second becomes a mirror, and they start to reflect on what they asked, why they asked it, whether they should have. Your silence becomes a subtle domination. It puts the burden on them to fill the space, and in filling it, they reveal themselves. You, on the other hand, remain hidden, and therefore elevated. Silence is tension. And most cannot bear it. That is why they talk. That is why they rush to explain. That is why they fold. But if you can hold that tension, you gain something rarer than agreement. You gain command. Machiavelli understood that fear and respect often come not from what is said, but from what is withheld. A ruler who speaks too much is no different than his subjects, but the ruler who says little, who chooses every word like a blade, he creates distance. And that distance becomes reverence, because when people don't know what you're thinking, they become careful. They become strategic. They step lightly around your presence. The illusion of depth is as powerful as depth itself. And silence is the stage on which that illusion performs. Look around you. How many people talk themselves into weakness? They interrupt themselves. They over-explain. They say just to clarify, when no one asked. Every word another inch they retreat from authority. Every explanation another concession. Every defense another erosion of self-respect. But the man who is silent when expected to speak, he is not ignored. He is studied, he is waited on, and in that pause he gathers leverage. Even in conflict, silence disarms. When accused, most will rush to respond. They argue, they defend, they try to repair the image of themselves in another's eyes. But the one who receives the accusation and says nothing, he terrifies, because his silence suggests something deeper, something unreadable. He may be guilty, he may be innocent, but he refuses to validate the question itself. And that refusal is a form of control. To explain is to seek peace, but power rarely concerns itself with peace, it concerns itself with position, and silence is position. When you speak, make it deliberate. But when you are silent, make it intentional, not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence of dominance, the silence that says, I owe you nothing, I reveal nothing, I do not move because you wish it. In that space, others will fill the void with their own words, their own thoughts, their own fears. You sit at the center of that storm untouched, because nothing demands attention like the man who does not need it. The moment you begin to explain yourself, you step down from the throne of authority and into the court of opinion. You become another voice begging to be understood, when true power is not earned through understanding. It is enforced through certainty. Explaining invites judgment, doubt, interrogation, but silence commands interpretation, and in that interpretation, you become larger than life. They project strength onto you because you do not hand it to them. Mystery keeps them guessing, guessing keeps them cautious, and caution keeps them beneath you. The man who explains is trying to prove, the man who withholds, he already knows. So the next time your instinct is to clarify, to defend, to soften your presence with words, don't. Let your silence speak, let your stillness imply, let your mystery do what words never can. Demand respect without asking for it.